Welcome to Ken's Sewing Center. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the features of the HD5000, but just to make certain you're well aware that the HD5000 comes in both a white edition and a black edition. So even though I'm working on the white edition, these features, these instructions are the same for both the white and the black models. So one of the first things you'll notice when you've taken your HD5000 out of the box, an instruction manual. So it's going to go over lots of what we are talking about today. So your HD5000 has an accessory tray, which is perfect for storing all of the accessories that came with your HD5000, but you can also remove it so you have access to the free arm. So you're working around pants, sleeves, even purses, easily to access stitching around that curve. The first thing we're going to do is wind a bobbin. So the bobbin winding is up on the top where you have your thread seated. To wind a bobbin, the only knob that your bobbin is going to go around is this little metal disc at the top. It needs to be snapped in that guide so that it's providing the correct amount of tension on that thread as you're doing your bobbin winding. You can simply start your bobbin by putting your thread through one of the holes in the bobbin. Now this is a Janome bobbin. It is class 15, but it is a Janome bobbin. And you'll know that this is a Janome bobbin because you'll see on that post of the bobbin the letter J. What makes this different from other class 15 bobbins is that this has some rubber embedded in it. So as it is spinning as you are doing your stitching, this bobbin will not unnecessarily wear away your bobbin case, your bobbin area, and it will last you many, many, many years. I'm just going to cut a clean end of this thread. And now you can simply feed this thread from the inside out through one of the holes that is in the bobbin. So here you can see, oops, let's try this again, apologize. Here you can see that that thread is coming from the inside out the top. And I say the top because that's the last part you're going to put the opposite side on first. Engage your bobbin winder by simply pressing that post for your bobbin winder to the right and step on your foot control. After you've wound a little bit of thread on here, you can simply cut that thread tail and continue winding. We'll disengage that and we'll cut our thread. And now we'll put the bobbin into the bobbin area. When you put this in, you'll see that you'll want your bobbin, your thread to be coming off like the letter P. So here's this thread tail and there's the bobbin. Another way to think of it is as you pull this thread, your bobbin spins counterclockwise. We'll remove the bobbin cover, this little black lever with the ridges on it. Just pull that to your right. Your bobbin cover pops off. And we'll put this in and there's a little arrow in the bobbin area that shows you where to pull it. Okay? We'll leave our bobbin cover off for a second. But let's look at the bobbin cover because there are all kinds of markings on your bobbin cover from 1/8 of an inch, 3/8, 5/8. But there are little markings in between those measurements. So in between 1/8 and 3/8 would be 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And between 3/8 and 5/8, of course, would be 1/2. So let's thread our machine. So we have our thread, and it is that classic down, up, down movement. So we're going to come down this first slot, around where it says number 2, come up on the right side, down on the left side. Okay. Make sure it gets in that take-up lever. There is a hook at the top of the needle and then through the eye of the needle. You actually do have a needle threader, and the easiest way for me is to simply lower the presser foot first. That gives me more room for my fingers to utilize the needle threader. This is your needle threader. Simply pull it down, and when it will now put a little wire through the eye of your needle. You'll go under this gray little hook that's just to the left of the needle. And then position your thread against that needle, and see how my hand is in essence holding my thread back toward the back of the machine. And that just helps it get in place so that when I use the needle threader, let the needle threader go. When you let the needle threader go, you need to let go of that thread tail, and now you have a big loop right there. Now, you can, if you'd like, to simply pull up your bobbin thread. And the easiest way to do that is to simply turn your hand wheel toward you. Always turn your hand wheel toward you. Have a hold of that top thread, turn that hand wheel toward you. It will grab that bobbin thread, give it a little tug. There's that big loop. And now we have both our bobbin thread and our top thread together. Now we'll put our bobbin cover back on. So let's now talk about the face of your HD5000 and your stitch selections. So you'll see a series of stitches and below them a number. And that number, of course, is referring to the stitch number. And this dial on the right-hand side of your machine, the one toward the bottom, is what's going to reposition that red indicator that tells you what stitch you are using. We're going to go all the way back to number 1, which of course will take us to straight stitch down the center of the foot. As we adjust our stitch selector, you'll see some little red icons above these numbers, above the stitch display. That is giving you a reference as to where you can adjust your stitch length and your stitch width. We are on straight stitch, and if we have our width at 0, that puts our needle down the center of the foot. As we adjust our width, you can see how our needle is actually repositioning itself. So you can position your needle wherever you'd like for your stitching. This, of course, is stitch length, how long or how short you're stitching. Traditional stitch length, if you think about garments, you're somewhere between 2 and 2.5, something like that. Many times quilters will like to do a little shorter stitch. It's all dependent on what you prefer. We're going to take our fabric. We're actually folding our fabric in half, sewing on 2 layers of fabric, just like we traditionally do, whether we're doing clothing, home deck, or piecing. At the beginning of a seam, many times we like to back stitch. And that's what this lever right here is for. As long as you hold that in place, you will continue to back stitch. So I'm going to stitch slowly so you can see how we're stitching, and now when we hold that in, how it continues to back stitch until I let it go. So let's watch that again. When you're done stitching, raise your presser foot. You might need to turn your hand wheel a little bit so that both of your threads are loose and pulling freely. There's a thread cutter on the side. And there's our stitching, and you can see where we held that back stitch in. And don't you love how that back stitching is right on top of our straight stitching? There's no veering to the left or to the right. It's immediately right on top of your stitching. So there's our straight stitch. And again, you can adjust your needle position. Again, this was down the center of the foot, or you can adjust your stitch length. Let's go to a zigzag stitch. Again, these little numbers below the pictures, we're going to turn. Stitch number 3 is our zigzag. It is telling us to use the A foot. Of course, this is the standard A foot that is on. It says right behind that little bar that we snap our foot onto, it says the letter A. This little black button that you see on the A presser foot is actually will help you jump over from a thin layer to a thicker layer, or vice versa if you're going from thick to thin. It will just help level out your foot so that you'll get nice consistent stitches over those uneven thicknesses. So we'll snap our foot back on. And let's do a zigzag. Again, when we look at the icons above the pictures, this is showing us our width and our length. So it's giving us guidance that our width can be anywhere from the 1 to 6 all the way across. And our length, how close the zigzag is, can be really anywhere from 1 to 4. So we'll just give this a little width. We'll make these a little closer together, and let's see what we get. Let's adjust this slightly smaller, and we'll go a little higher too. When you're done stitching, you of course are going to raise your presser foot, but right now it really isn't wanting to allow me to pull my fabric out. And this is where you're just going to reach for your hand wheel. Remember, you're always going to turn your hand wheel towards you, and while you're just pulling this very lightly and turn your hand wheel, you'll feel it when those threads open up and you can pull it out easily. So there's our zigzag stitch where we've adjusted some of the stitch length and width. You have some fun decorative stitches, and let's go to stitch number 10, a nice pretty scallop. Again, this knob on the bottom is what we're going to use to adjust it to stitch number 10. The letters above those pictures are telling you what presser foot to use. And this is the F foot. There's, again, the letter behind that bar that we snap it onto. Now, why is it important to use the F foot when we're doing this stitch? It's the design of the foot. The A foot that we've been using for straight and zigzag, which are kind of, I'll use the term a flat stitch, it is perfectly flat on the bottom. Now, if you try to use a decorative stitch with this A foot, because of all that buildup of thread, it might not feed under the foot easily, and it can be frustrating. Remember, your HD5000 is telling you to use that F foot. So let's put the F foot on. Again, this is the F foot, and there is actually a little tunnel on the bottoms of this foot that allows the buildup of stitches to feed under, to glide under easily. So how are we now going to adjust our length and width? Remember, pictured above the stitches, those red lines are giving you that information, how to adjust stitch length and width. The information in your lid is also giving you information a second time with respect to length and width. Now it's telling us our width, the best settings for this stitch is somewhere between 3 and 6. So we're at a 5. Let's see what we get. Stitch length, how close those stitches are together, it actually is telling us a little bit below 1. So we're going to slide this over so it's a little below 1. And now we're going to do some of the decorative stitching. When you do decorative stitching, you will want to use some stabilizer. Decorative stitches, there's so much thread going on that sometimes if you do not use a stabilizer, it will actually scrunch, or you might hear the word tunnel your fabric. The stabilizer gives your fabric all that support it needs. It's kind of like using interfacing on clothing. So let's lower the foot and start stitching. And again, when you are now done stitching, raise your presser foot and again turn that hand wheel. You're pulling this slightly, but turn your hand wheel until your threads flow freely. And there's the little scallop. Wouldn't that be a fun way to like hem up a garment? Instead of just using a straight stitch, use a fun decorative stitch. You have some other fun decorative stitches, and let's just go to stitch number 11. Now it's telling us go back to the A foot. So we'll change our foot back to the A foot, because this one you'll see is, again, I'll use the term a flat stitch. The scallop we just did had a lot of thread on it. This is more of a flat stitch. Once again, keeping with that stabilizer. And as it's stitching, notice how the fabric is moving forward and backward. Let that fabric move freely. No need to keep your hands here. If you were following a line, you can just keep your hand here gently, but no need to really hold that fabric and your fingers move while the fabric is moving. We'll stop stitching, raise our foot, and once again, reach for that hand wheel. Again, always turning it towards you, and turn this until you get 2 free threads. So there's separate threads here. And there's a little crosshatch. So a fun little decorative stitch. So with your HD5000, you do get a bonus package of some quilting attachments. So included in your quilting attachments is an open toe foot for decorative stitches. You get a 1/4 inch piecing foot. And you can see it has a guide on the side so that you can just butt your fabric up next to it and do your beautiful 1/4 inch stitching. You get a free motion foot. So free motion, when you're putting your 3 layers of fabric together, you're backing, your batting, and your quilt top. When you do free motion, you actually drop your feed dogs. And you have a lever in the back. And let me take this foot off for a second. And we can probably hear it and probably see it. You can just see the feed dogs right here. When I drop the feed dogs, there's a lever. You heard it, and now you can see that those feed dogs are below the surface of your throat plate. So that is the perfect setting for your free motion. And again, this is that free motion foot that comes with your HD5000. You also get a walking foot. This is an alternative way that some quilters like to quilt their projects. It's providing a layer of feed dogs on the top of your fabric, so it feeds all of your layers, whether you're quilting, you're backing, you're batting in your quilt top, or even if you're sewing some clothing or fabric that's a little fussy, that doesn't want to feed through smoothly, you certainly can use your walking foot. One example, if you were working with a velvet and attaching it to a different type of fabric. So might be a garment that you're making, velvet to a crepe skirt, or velvet for a pillow, and you're using a traditional cotton weight. Those fabrics might not work together beautifully, but your feed dogs from your upper feed dogs on your walking foot will help you accomplish a successful project. Now you can see this little slot in the back here, and what is that slot for? That slot is for this quilting bar. This quilting bar, let's say you were wanting to quilt a project together and you wanted to create cross hatching. You know, those rows of stitching that are perfectly parallel separated. Instead of you having to mark every line that you want to stitch, this quilting bar actually just snaps into the back. Press hard. And now this quilting bar is snug in there. It, of course, is repositionable depending on how far you want those rows to be, but it is not moving as you're stitching or accidentally touching it with your hand. It's not moving, and it will stay and keep your measurement consistent. How you attach your walking foot to your HD5000, you're actually going to take this screw off, this big screw that you see on the left-hand side. And this is what we many times will refer to as your ankle, because your feet snap onto your ankle. And now right here is where that screw that you just removed will go. But the most important part is this lever. This lever needs to be above your needle screw, so that as your needle is going up and down, you can kind of see how these feed dogs that are on top with this walking foot, that is going to have them move up and down also and work. So just to show you quickly, we would position where our needle is, where our screw would go, but right now you kind of see that that lever is below the needle screw. So what you probably want to do is just position your walking foot there, turn that hand wheel, again, always towards you, so now you can clearly see that needle screw. The screw would go there, and there, that lever just fell on top of the needle screw. That way, the feed dogs on top are working because that needle, as it goes up and down, is working and making those feed dogs move. So now, let's do one more thing. We're going to put this ankle back on because we want to make a buttonhole, because it makes beautiful buttonholes. And if we take a quick look at our stitches, you'll see that our buttonhole is all the way to the furthest left position. So we're just going to move our selector over to where it says buttonhole. Okay. I'm going to tighten this screw. I just put that ankle back on. Just use your screwdriver. Just give it a secure little twist. Don't have to do a real severe tightening of it, but make sure it's on. It is telling us to use the BH, the buttonhole, I'm sorry, the R, the buttonhole foot, which is this right here. It is telling us that our width of our stitch needs to be somewhere between 4 and 6. And right now we're on 5, so we're pretty good. And it's also telling us that our stitch length needs to be somewhere between 0 and 1. So we're good to go. This actually will measure our buttonhole. So we can simply put our button right here. Now, this is just a spool cap that comes with your machine to help hold those spools of thread on. And so we'll use this as our sizer. We'll pretend that this is our buttonhole. It's going to snap on right there, of course. So we just snapped on our buttonhole foot, and remember, raise that presser foot lifter up just to ensure that that foot is physically attached to your ankle. Now, the last thing that you need to do when you're making a buttonhole is to pull down the buttonhole lever. And what do I mean? Behind your needle threader, there's another little lever tucked up in there. And when you pull it down, it has the letters BH on it, or a picture of a buttonhole on it. And that is what will tell your HD5000 to, after it starts stitching backwards, that's as long of a buttonhole you want, and it will kick it back towards you and finish the buttonhole. We're going to use some stabilizer. As we did with our decorative stitches, we're going to use some stabilizer. Again, traditionally on garments, you would see an interfacing for buttonholes, but this is perfect to use your stabilizer. We'll lower our foot and just simply step on the foot control. So you're always going to make a sample buttonhole when you make buttonholes. And why do I say that? Because as you look at this, you look at these side parts of the buttonhole and you say to yourself, I might want those a little closer together. To get those closer together, we're going to adjust our stitch length, make it shorter or a little closer to 0, okay? And let's see what we get. So let's make another buttonhole because we just, again, adjusted that stitch length. Now, you need to, and I'm going to use the term, reset the buttonhole. Tell it to start from the beginning. And how you simply reset that is just going to your stitch selector, go to stitch number 1, and back to your buttonhole. And one icon you'll see, icon you'll see on your screen or on the face of your machine is a little backward arrow. And that actually is telling you exactly what we just did. Reset it by going to 1 and then back to the buttonhole. So again, turn that hand wheel if you need to. And now look at the appearance of this buttonhole. See how those sides are more satin appearance than here, because we simply made that adjustment of our stitch length. Beautiful buttonhole. So, thank you for your purchase of a Janome HD5000 from Ken's Sewing Center.